Welcome to the Test Guild Automation Podcast, where we all get together to learn more about automation and software testing. With your host, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Today, we'll be talking all about API shift left performance testing with Patrick Pullen, the CEO and co-founder of API Fortress. I actually originally published this podcast on my other podcast, which is the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. But the information is so awesome that I wanted to share it on this podcast as well. Because as you know, I think automation encompasses not just functional automation, but any type of automation that's going to help your team create quicker, faster, higher quality software. And that includes non-functional testing, such as security and performance testing. And that's also another reason why I added 2 days to my normally 3-day event that happens at Automation Guild every year. We're going to have the 5th annual online conference dedicated 100% to helping you succeed with creating end-to-end full-stack automation awesomeness. We've been doing this way before COVID-19, so this is not an online play due to COVID. It's something we've always believed in, is in delivering high-quality online experiences geared towards testers to help them so they don't have to travel, they don't have to spend a lot of money, and they can still get all the awesome speakers that they're used to seeing on site, all online, and experience an on-site event online. If you haven't experienced it yet, or if you have already and you haven't yet bought your ticket, why not? Head on over to automationguild.com, purchase your ticket for the 5th annual event. And you're going to have 2 options. You have the first option, which is just the standard 3-day automation testing event, where all tracks will be geared towards strictly automation testing from a functional testing perspective. However, the next 2 days, if you buy the 5-day ticket, will get you all the other tracks that we're going to be covering: accessibility testing, chaos testing, security testing, performance testing, all types of other automation testing that you should be doing as well, that I think you really need to know about in 2021 and beyond. Our goal at all Guild conferences is that you're going to discover a tip, tool, technique, or best practice that's going to help you and your teams accelerate either a new or an existing automation testing project. You really don't want to miss this 5th annual online event. It's going to be epic, the biggest one ever. Definitely register today. Head on over to automationguild.com. Hope to see you there. The Test Guild Automation Podcast is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs. Their cloud-based test platform helps ensure your favorite mobile apps and websites work flawlessly on every browser, operating system, and device. Get a free trial. Visit testguild.com/Sauce Labs and click on the exclusive sponsor section to try it for free for 14 days. Check it out. Hey, Patrick, welcome to the Guild.
Hey, thanks for having me. Love a good trumpet intro.
Awesome. So Patrick, it's been a long time since you've been on the show. What have you been up to? For the folks that don't know, just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Patrick Poulin, the CEO of API Fortress. We've been in the API testing space since, I'd say, 2015. We were mostly stealth initially, but for the last 2 years, we've been public and doing really well, getting a lot of large and medium-sized customers.
So Patrick, I think a lot of times when people think of API testing, they just automatically go to functional testing. So I thought we'd do a little bit different thought process here and focus more on performance testing. So where does API testing come into the performance testing picture?
Well, I mean, foundationally, APIs run a lot of these web platforms. I know in my background, I actually came from, I was building my first job in tech. I was building like the world's first like mobile apps and mobile websites. And one of the bigger issues we would have was, this was back in the iPhone 3GS days when the networks were not the 5G they are today. Well, allegedly 5G, but everything was just slower. So if your mobile app had a 1 megabyte download or a payload that was a megabyte, like the app might crash, the device didn't have the memory to work with that. Like there was a lot of, the weight of things was significant. And now it's the more statistics we have, the more we prove that like you'll lose a conversion if the performance of your application isn't up to snuff for customers, simply because they have other options.
So Patrick, I know you've been going to a lot of conferences as a vendor. Just curious to know what your pulse is on the industry. Are more and more folks using API testing for performance testing, or are they still even neglecting it in the functional testing part of their test strategy?
I would say in the last year, which is why API Fortress sponsored close to 20 conferences this year. It's really changed in that API testing has become a much larger conversation in the testing community. It's, everything is build first, test later. And APIs where they've been around forever, but really the inflection point happened about 2 years ago. And so, early last year, we'd be talking to people, they wouldn't even wouldn't really know what an API is. They wouldn't be testing anything. Like, your sponsor SmartBear. SmartBear has some pretty interesting white papers out about the statistics of how many large, medium, and small organizations that don't have a formal API testing process. And in the last year, that's really sort of exploded. Like, we do presentations sometimes on how to go from manual API testing to automated API testing. And it's, 2 years ago when we were doing these presentations, it would just be 10 people. And now it's standing room only because it's a thing now. Like, now that we've sort of have so many solutions and been so matured in terms of UI testing and mobile app testing, it's time for that next phase, which is the actual foundation of those things. It seems crazy to say that people aren't testing them, but I can tell you for a fact that it's pretty rare we speak to an organization that has perfect functional testing and load testing of their APIs already.
So I would think it would be easier to do performance testing or functional testing of an API because you usually have that done before the UI, and usually APIs are driving the UI. So what seems to be the resistance? Just education?
Education and lack of tooling. The tooling now exists, but Load Ninja came out this year, and API Fortress only had load testing earlier this year. Before that, people were trying to use like JMeter to do load testing, and then you really had to program it by hand. Like, that's one of the reasons that API testing has had some stagnation. You really have to be a lot more developer centric. And so it's, you require people with a more specific skill set, and those can be more difficult to find. And they already have a lot of stuff to work on, a lot of other stuff. So with the load testing, like the tooling has really come out as of late. That's been significant. And I know in our platform, like the big focus for us is to not have completely disparate products that do different things. So in our platform, like we generate an API test and you tweak it and you can create this really smart end-to-end test. But the benefit is, why not just use that same test as your load test? Previously, people might use JMeter for load testing, but then they have to write a completely different sort of test. If they're going to do functional testing, they'd use a completely different tool. So unifying those has been one of our main focal points. And I think that's why things have become a lot more prevalent. And it's just the beginning this year. It's going to be even bigger next year, I'm sure of it.
You seem to always be adding functionality, and I'm sure you're not just doing it willy-nilly. So obviously there had to have been demand for performance testing. So I like how you said you're reusing your assets almost all in the same ecosystem. So how hard is it to take an existing functional API test and then make it a performance test within your platform?
Oh, it's the exact same thing. When you go to the load testing option, you just pick one of your tests and you say, all right, run this using these load generators for 300 milliseconds with a duration of 300 milliseconds, ramping up over 30 seconds. Like, we very specifically built it so it's all built off the same thing. And the thing that's been really interesting for us is that that was obviously well received, and it's now a major part of the packages we sell today. But what's been really interesting is seeing how people are now leveraging the APIs, because we're a platform first. We have tooling and command line tooling and all that stuff, but ultimately, like, everything in the platform can be hit by an API, whether it's execution, test generation, or your data or notifications. So on an API level, you can execute your functional tests, but you can also execute your API tests. And that's been really interesting to see. Like, we just built that just because we build everything on API first, but to see how well received that's been, that people wanted to run these load tests as part of their CI pipeline. Because it should be noted, when we're talking about these load tests, we're using our existing functional test and actually running the functional testing along with the load testing. So you get all the statistics on the load testing, but we're also telling you, like, hey, if there's one object that can't keep up, if there's 5,000 concurrent users, that's good to know. And, customers report back to us, that's what they find. Like, they'll find a memory leak, or they'll find, one database that's feeding one specific object that just can't keep up under a certain amount of load while everything else responds 200 okay. Like, that specificity is significant in this day and age where we expect more of ourselves.
So what differentiates a functional API test from performance API test? Is it just you're running more of them?
No. So a functional API test, the core feature of that. And I mean, this is all goes into, everyone has a different definition of functional test, end-to-end test, integration test. But to us at API Fortress, like when we talk about a functional test, it quite literally means it's almost like proofreading a book, the entire payload being validated. Not just that every object is there, but also like the data that's associated with that object is there. And then on top of that, like our platform, one of the big things we push is that the business logic testing, which you could only do with an API. So let's say you have a retailer and you search for the color red. Well, you might find red shoes or a red dress. They're both going to have a size object, but that size object has a very different range, whether it's a pair of shoes or a dress. A pair of shoes would be like, 2 to 22, although if it's in Europe, its shoe size would be like 32 to 52. So it's just those ranges can be validated on an API level, and you can't necessarily validate that in a UI Selenium test. And there's always a way, but that's just not how people are doing it. And that's the benefit of focusing on API tests. You can catch a lot more. And to us, like that's how we're defining functional tests. A load test to us is running a reproduction of a normal user behavior at a much higher level. So for us, like search, add to cart, checkout, that would be one solid end-to-end test you create in our platform. Then running that exact thing 5,000 times over 4 minutes, for example. Like to us, that's the difference. So it's the proofreading of a book versus like what happens when you run 5,000 of those at once.
So Patrick, another thing that usually comes into play is monitoring. So does the platform offer any sort of monitoring, or do you integrate with any sort of monitoring systems? So as you're doing that load, that you're able to see different metrics?
Yeah, that's actually a funny, literally in the last 12 hours, we just closed 2 new deals where one of the major reasons why we won those deals against, we went head to head against other people, and we won them because monitoring's built into the platform. That actually was our initial intent with API Fortress. It was a functional uptime monitoring platform. But with the shift to Agile and CI/CD, like we had to sort of talk a lot about that other stuff. But as of late, it's shifting. It's shifting back to where we originally started, whereby, monitoring your internal APIs that are the basis of your internal platforms or the basis of your, customer-facing mobile apps. You need to know those APIs are up, and not just up or down, but functionally up. And so that's been interesting for us. We get people interested by saying, yeah, we could integrate automated testing into your CI pipeline. And so that's how we started the conversation with the last 2 people we've just closed with. But then the next piece is like, all right, but then can I use this test as a load test? Yes. All right, cool. Can I also use this test as a functional uptime monitor? Yes, you can. And so it's been really powerful for us, because we have the one thing that people don't realize is that if they're not specifically in the space is that APIs can be very sensitive. They are often not available. Most of them are not available outside of an intranet or outside of their firewall. So you need to be able to either get your IPs whitelisted by the customer, which is always sort of a pushback from the security ops team, or just deploy the whole platform internally. And that's a unique differentiator for API Fortress. Like, we're container experts. Our whole platform runs out of a Kubernetes or Docker container. You deploy it on-prem and you have complete control and ownership of all the data and the results, and everything can hit your internal APIs and microservices that are behind your firewall, because it's all internalized. Nothing goes back outwardly. So security ops doesn't struggle to approve it.
So I actually didn't know you had that functionality. I love the concept of shifting right almost, where you wrote your tests, you're all the way through the life cycle, you release it in the wild, and now you're monitoring it, gathering that feedback to inform you how to develop again. So it's like iterative. So it sounds like you have the shipped right in place as well now. How many companies are using that feature? Is that common?
It's becoming more and more common. I would say in like the last 2 months, all the deals we've closed, about 70% are really they really came in hot because of the monitoring aspect capabilities. So for us, it's, I'll give you one example of one customer. Like we don't just talk to QA teams. Our platform is very received by like architects. So people that are making a big push to APIs, they might be buying like a big API, like an EBS, like an Apogee or a MuleSoft or Kong or TIBCO Mastery, what have you. They're buying one of those because they're making a big API shift. And so it's like a chief architect that's looking at that. But as they're purchasing that platform, they realize that those platforms don't have testing. They've never had testing. Like they have pieces of it, but they don't truly have proper API testing. And so we get bought as part of that same purchase. So it's a budget of like, hey, we got this thing to help us build, but we also need another piece to help us test. So we come in as part of that purchase because the architects say like, oh, cool, I can write an endpoint test using my own IDE, execute from the command line. But then they can hand it off to the QA team who can pick up your endpoint test that the developers created or the engineers created, use those as the foundation when they create end-to-end tests. So a developer might test, like he built this endpoint, he'll test that endpoint. QA is looking to see how does that whole API program work throughout a normal user flow. So a single test that does, again, search, add to cart, checkout, that whole flow should be validated in one intelligent test. And then it gets handed off to that same test. DevOps team and the ops team can come in and say like, hey, I'm just going to schedule this as a monitor. And it's not just monitoring production. Like we're seeing more and more the interest in monitoring different tiers of their staging environments, like staging 1, pre-prod, gold standard. Like they want to monitor all those pieces because everyone is working off of the staging environment. They're not working off production. So a lot of this monitoring comes into monitoring internal environments.
Awesome. So the full name of this podcast is the Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. So I think this type of testing is critical for your site being reliable. And like you said, you're able to monitor all your different environments. So what happens, how does that work? Does it say like there's a threshold that if you don't get a response back in a certain amount of time, 3 times in a row that they get alerted? Like how does that piece work?
Well, with API Fortress for the monitoring, like we're using a functional test. So if there's any functional issue, which can include just like the size object not being in the correct range, if you choose that to be one of the options, you'll be notified of that. And if there's a critical outage, like we have throttling there, so you don't get inundated with emails or Slack notifications or PagerDuty pings or Jira tickets, like all those are built out into the platform as integrations. But there's throttling for major catastrophic events, but you really choose whether you're just validating that it's up or down, whether you just want to validate that the fetch of the latencies below a certain level, or, and it's what we always suggest, like a proper functional test. That same test you would use to validate your latest deployment as part of your CI pipeline, that same test should be your monitor. And that's really easy in API Fortress because we have a built-in scheduler. Take the test, click on the schedule button, and you're done.
So Patrick, I'm just trying to remember a previous conversation. I thought you brought something up where your tool had some sort of functionality where it did a lot of things for you automatically that other tools may not have built into them. Was it the creation of I forgot what it was.
Yeah, we had a test creation. So we can create a test from either a payload or from a spec file. And so it gives you a draft of the test, and which is really beneficial for customers that are dealing with, I don't know if you ever looked at like Instagram or Spotify's payloads, but they're very long, very nested. That's incredibly annoying to set up on like programmatically if you're just looking in your IDE. Our platform actually set that all up for you. And then it gives you the ability to you tweak it from there. So for one analogy I like to make is, people ask like, how do you write a test? I'm like, it's sort of the same way that we all learned how to create a website. You looked at a website you liked, oh, this thing has frames. That's amazing. Then you right click, and I probably just dated myself there, but you just right click and go view source and suddenly you understand how the structure of the HTML works. That's how we like to do in our platform. We create the foundation, then you edit it and make it smarter from there.
So Patrick, I think a lot of people sometimes are worried about APIs because they don't necessarily know about all the other dependencies or other microservices that may be needed in order to make a full transaction. Do you usually just focus on one API, or do you create like a flow that automatically touches all these other APIs?
I mean, we always suggest that people create a test for every endpoint, as well as creating entire user flows. So what your 80% of your customers do, creating that flow as a test on an API level. But the thing that's been really interesting, like we've been building a lot of stuff since we last chatted. We have this micro gateway we call Aftem. It's in our GitHub. It's open source. What it can do is it can record API calls. It makes it very easy for you to record API transactions. And we actually run into a lot of organizations that, maybe they've worked there for a year, but that company's been around for 20 years building APIs. So they'll have a mobile app and they'll be doing mobile. This actually just happened with an airline that I've been talking to lately. They have a mobile app, and the person that does that mobile app testing has been told, all right, cool, we need you to also start testing the APIs. So he's starting this journey, and he doesn't even know how to make an API. He knows how to make API calls, but not all of the API calls that are involved in the mobile app. Like he was never given a proper set of documentation that says, hey, the mobile app uses these 19 endpoints. And so what we're helping them with is like, well, you know what? You could just set up our micro gateway. So like you do your normal mobile app testing, run your automated suite or just do it manually, we will capture the API calls behind that and give it to you in like the screen we call the logger. Then you could see all of the API transactions that are involved in your normal usage of the mobile app. And then you could create tests right from that logger screen.
That's really cool. So you talked about educating people going from manual to functional testing. At what point do you recommend performance testing when you're talking to customers now? Are you trying to shift it left, or is it still after the fact once everything's built?
No, I mean, we show them as part of the initial demo because, our load testing isn't meant to replace like HP Load Runner. It's meant to be fairly lightweight, but very informative as part of like a CI pipeline for like testers. And so that's why we show them, like, just so you know, this exact same thing can all run as part of your CI pipeline. We try to get them hooked onto it right away because you catch a lot of stuff you didn't expect. Like there's a lot of memory leaks and just, older services that aren't keeping up that should be seen before it has to go to the load runner team. A lot of large organizations, their load testing team is completely disparate and different from their actual testing team. So we're trying to give some of that power back to the testing team.
No, I completely love this approach. Absolutely. The sooner you can test something, you might as well test it. And like you said, it's not an enterprise full-blown performance test, but that's good because as they're developing, they can do this confidence canary type testing, fix it before it gets to the point where it's like taking months to fix. So did you see a lot of customers finding value that way?
Yeah, everyone that started we actually have a couple customers that started talking to us just for this capability. They weren't even as interested in the functional testing. We've gotten them won over on that, but for some reason they viewed performance as more important than functionality, which is kind of confusing, but that's the world they live in. We're all different companies with different goals and different types of APIs and with different business intentions.
Very cool. So Patrick, as I said, I know you're always constantly iterating on your product. You're always making it better. And I think I didn't see the study, but I heard a study came out by Foster, I believe, that did a comparison of different tools. Like, where did your tool rank compared to other maybe options out there? Not to say one's better than the other, but different ones have different advantages. So, like, how would you say yours has an advantage over maybe another tool?
Sure. The thing with Forrester is that it's interesting. It takes a long time just to be recognized as a player in the space. So, and they actually haven't created an API testing wave in like 3 years. And they said they're creating a new one this year. We're very motivated to get them to create a new wave. We would love to see our tool compared with all of the players out there because we know we built a better thing from scratch. Their tools have 12 years of iteration, a lot of great features. But what we have is what people need for today's agile DevOps workflows. That's what we're built for. We are a platform that's API enabled. We are not a downloadable application. We have downloadable applications. That's not what we are. So we're very confident in the head-to-head comparison of all that stuff. Now, I don't know when Forrester's going to do their new wave, but we were not on the original wave they created 3 years ago because we were still a bit in our infancy.
Cool. So when you say API testing platform, can you just again explain what that means to folks that may not know exactly what that means?
API Fortress is entirely focused on the testing and quality of your API program. That's our entire focus. There are other tools out there that offer the option. They'll have a tab that says, why don't you write some JavaScript in here and you could do some testing as well. And it's a very good start. Like you have the ability to actually upload Postman collections in our platform because Postman collections are awesome. Postman is awesome. Postman is one of the main reasons why we've had such a good year because they've helped educate the market on what an API is. With that said, we think due to our complete unfettered focus on testing, we have more capabilities for those people that are really looking to create strong automation suites dedicated to APIs.
So we're built from the ground up, focused on API testing. That's your bread and butter. But I mean, it's a full stack kind of solution as well. From beginning all the way to the end, it covers you.
Exactly. Like we have a lot of our customers we don't have a customer that doesn't use Postman. Everyone uses Postman. It's great. It's great for what it is. But when customers are ready to take their testing to the next level, we've had a great success in being part of those conversations and having those opportunities. But again, without Postman, I'm not sure we would have had the year that we had, because they have truly helped us educate the market about what an API is and the importance and how foundational they are to everyone's applications. So Postman's been a real godsend for all of us in the API community.
Awesome. So Patrick, any tips for folks that are trying to get more into performance testing with API tests? Is there a way they can develop their APIs to be more performant, or a way to develop scripts to make them so they make better performance tests?
I mean, I'm not an engineer. I'm sure there's all sorts of tricks engineers can suggest. I used to be a lot more technical than I am now. I'm getting dumber every day the more I have to do a CEO role. But what I can say is that the one thing they can do is just test it at every phase. Every release, test, get those metrics, get those numbers, and you'll have comparables. And then you could see like if things are getting slower over time. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the slow degradations happen with like some of our favorite applications. Like I remember back in the Winamp days, like Winamp 3 was so good. 3.1 was amazing. Then AOL bought it, it became version 4, and suddenly it was a heavy beast. People stopped wanting to use it because the performance wasn't there anymore. It wasn't the lightweight, great MP3 player that it once was. And then version 5, they rolled back to version 3 basically. Like there's something to be said for performance. And if you don't have those metrics, you won't realize that it's getting slower over time. You need to find a way to measure it and keep a history of it and make sure everyone's aware of it.
Okay, Patrick, before we go, is there one piece of actual advice you could share with someone to help them with their API testing efforts, and let us know the best way to find, contact you, or learn more about API Fortress?
Sure. We actually created API Testing University, which is sort of a subset of our docs, but I think we also, if you just go to apitestinguniversity.com, you can go there too. We're trying to put more and more information about what we're training our customers and our, the people that we work with. Like they ask us for advice all the time because we've been doing this forever. Like we're the experts in the space. So we're helping put more content out there, the sort of stuff that we do at our presentations on the website. So take a look there so you can understand better of like, what's basic API testing and then what's more advanced API testing. When you start talking about being data driven and not, using a small CSV, but actually using a dynamic, huge database, or using an API to feed data into your API test. Those more advanced use cases are really how you get from like a C- test to an A+ test. APIfortress.com. I'm Patrick if you want to email me.
Thank you, Patrick, for your performance testing awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A332. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try for Free Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.